and get started here and jump into our webinar today. So we are going to be chatting about seal the deal, aligning sales and legal to close win more deals. So we're excited to have today's conversation, and here with us is a good friend of Domestique. His name is Robert Donnell. He's also a good friend of ours personally. So just a little context. Robert and I had actually worked together at a previous organization. What was kind of cool about it is before Robert came in, we got to see what sales and legal, when it wasn't working well, looked like. And then Robert came in and started to implement a lot of the things we're going to chat through today. We got to see what it kind of looked like when it was working well. So Robert is with KO Law. Robert, you want to give a 30-second TLDR about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a lawyer here with KO Law. I've been in practice for just over 10 years. Kind of started backwards in that I worked at two companies in-house as the head of legal. And then I migrated out to Big Law and then eventually to KO. And I'm here doing commercial contracts and technology-related contracts. And in my free time, I'm a big rock climber, and I climbed El Cap in a day in Yosemite a few years ago. That's about it. I have a bulldog.
Well, the bulldog's most important.
So, yeah. There you go.
Robert, welcome. And then for those of you who I haven't met, my name is Rhys. I'm one of the co-founders here at Domestique. Domestique, we're a RevOps agency, built my career in it, grew up in Colorado. I am unequivocally not a great rock climber. I can mess around in the gym, and I do have a Bernedoodle, and he will let you know if an Amazon guy shows up here. So fingers crossed that the Amazon does not show up today. So, all right, what are we going to chat about here today? We'll do a 10-second overview about Domestique and KO, but then we're going to dive into this. We're going to talk about what's the problem with the sales and legal misalignment. We want you to come away with specific tactics you can take away out of this webinar of things you can actually go and do. The funny part is Alex, who's my co-founder here at Domestique, we hate consultants and somehow we became them. But the reason why we hate them is because they always talk in big pictures and don't give you any tactics. We want you coming away with tactics. As part of those tactics, we're going to talk about frequently negotiated terms and some things you can think about in those terms. And then at the end, we'll provide a checklist. Couple of notes here. Feel free to jump in. We'd vastly rather have this be conversation. We got a question, come off mute, toss in the chat. We'll respond to it. We've also got some questions here at the end, so don't hesitate to kind of reach out. We also have this recorded, so we'll send this out afterwards. And if anybody has any questions or has questions coming out of this, we're always happy to kind of jump on a call and do kind of like quick sounding board questions coming out. So with that, any questions? Otherwise, looks like we got another person coming in. Hi, Gia. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. I apologize if I'm not, but it's great to see you. We're just getting started here and excited to jump in. So Robert, give us the 20 seconds about KO and, why should anybody here on the call actually listen to what you're saying today?
Yeah, KO is a boutique business law firm here in Denver and Boulder, and we operate kind of in the primary areas of small to mid-sized businesses, represent a few larger clients as well. In corporate transactional, where you kind of build, finance, and sell companies. So all the way from formation through venture financing to M&A at the end. And I'm on the operational contracts and technology team, where we do just a lot of technology contracting, helping to protect IP and protect the companies through their life cycle. We also have a data privacy and security team that is integrated really closely into the technology team, given sort of the way that technology is moving and how important data is.
And I can personally say, just full transparency, KO is actually Domestique's law firm. They've been great partners with us and really helped us in a lot of things we're doing. So we're big fans of them over there. So a little bit about Domestique. I mentioned it. We are a RevOps agency. When we talk about RevOps, across the entire customer journey, strategy, process, tools, data enablement, that's how we think about revenue operations. We have a team of 40. It's really a full stack RevOps team. So marketing ops experts, RevOps experts, CS ops experts, content enablement, all of the tech admins, so HubSpot, Marketo, Salesforce, so on and so forth. So when we partner with organizations, one of the things they like is we can actually bring a full stack RevOps team and bring different expertise based upon what those organizations need. We're all a bunch of ex-operators, so we're not trying to kind of provide just a bunch of slideware. We can actually get in, roll up our sleeves, and do the work. And banter is definitely our love language. So whenever we work with clients, we definitely like to needle one another. So cool. Let's jump into this. So for those of you who've worked, I know we're kind of like chatting with a few of you here before we jumped in here, and it sounds like that we got a few individuals on the legal side of the house, and it sounds like I think we also have a few people on kind of the more go-to-market side of the house. One of the things that we see on a regular basis is the misalignment between sales and legal. Oftentimes the deals slipping, prolonged sales cycles, all that type of stuff. What was actually very interesting, Robin and I were doing a little research and prep for this webinar. If you actually look at the data, there's actually a small percentage of deals that end up close losing. So the vast majority of what ends up happening is is the slipping of deals over time. We particularly see this in the mid-market and the enterprise space. So I'm not sure what everybody's, fiscal year's on, but we're about to run into March, which for anybody on the calendar year, you're coming in the last quarter of this. We see this all the time. The number of times I've sat in a forecasting call and everybody's like, 6 weeks to go to the end of the quarter is like, this deal's coming in. And all of a sudden it goes into legal, and all of a sudden, 2 weeks to go in the quarter, like, this is going to come in next quarter. Robert, any kind of other thoughts you would like highlight here in the problem? We're going to break this down a little bit further, but anything else you want to kind of like context you want to put in around as we kind of like frame the problem we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that increased time to contract has real world implications for the business. You're getting the revenue in later. You're not hitting quarterly numbers. All of that stuff really matters, even if you are still winning the deal. And I think that it also is something that a cleaner process can typically work through. So that I mean, sometimes you're in deals and the other side is just being a complete pain, and you're just not going to be able to make it happen quickly. But other times, I've been involved in companies and with clients where there's just a lot of internal miscommunication and delays on our side that slow the deal down. And I think that that's what we're trying to solve for here. You can't control your counterparty, but you can control your own responsiveness, and we can make that get a lot more deals in within the quarter.
I love it. I love it. And the cool part, as I alluded to earlier, for those of you who heard, Robert and I have worked together, and we got to see what it looked like when it didn't go well and what it looked like after it was going well. And there's a stark difference between the two. So let's break down this problem a little further of like, why do deals slip? So we've identified kind of 4 key areas of why deals slip. And we're going to kind of talk through each of the areas, and then we're going to get into the tactics about how to solve each of those. So the first is this kind of cultural disconnect, right? And, I can speak from kind of the revenue side, the go-to-market side of the house, because that's oftentimes where RevOps is kind of sitting and working and so on and so forth. However, a side note, when RevOps is done well, legal is one of the key stakeholders that we're working with on an ongoing basis, right? And so this is how we're trying to drive this to doing well. I think one of the major things we've seen is when this is not going well, sales is sitting there saying, WTF, what's going on? Robert's sitting over there. He got my contract, 3 or 4 days ago. Why isn't he turning around? He's just redlining things just to redline things because that guy's got a fancy red pen. What's he doing? Like, Robert, like, walk us through the perspective from the legal side. Like, I'm curious, like, I know that's how a bunch of salespeople said. They're just like, this guy, this team, they're impacting my commissions. I'm not going to be able to afford going out on a Friday night. Like, what's the legal perspective?
Yeah, I think it's funny because I actually literally do have a fancy red pen. I think I always sort of want to get into the solution for this because I think that there's so much synergies, but we're talking problems now. And so I think a lot of the folks that are on the call right now are sort of in the legal space, and they know what it's like to have the workload that they have and then get reach out from sales. And I think that the sort of like classic example is, right, like sales rep who's in his 20s sends over 100-page contract that's just redlined bloody, and you take a skim through it and you say, okay, so like, when do you need this? Later today, maybe? And you're like, I won't be able to even like open this up for a week and a half. And so and then it's going to take me, like a full week to work through it. And it just sort of like blows your mind. And then the other classic example is then they follow up every day, twice a day for the remainder of the time that you're working on it.
Yeah, but Robert, like sending the email of like any update here, like that helps you work faster, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I had a sales leader when I was in-house who literally would move his desk next to mine at the end of quarter and literally look over my shoulder as I was like working to get stuff done. And of course, yeah, it helped me work much faster.
Well, just spoiler alert for everybody. That's not in our tactics. Just Felicia is smiling, so I think she can resonate with this. I think there's an important like call out here, right? Exactly what Robert's saying. There are mutual interests going on, right? Legal is sitting there trying to kind of protect the best interest of the organization, and sales is trying to kind of get the deal across, which helps them the deal, right? But it's kind of like there's that disconnect because they may not appreciate where each is at. So.
Well, and I think the thing that I always want to highlight with the disconnect is, right, like companies have sort of balance of powers for a reason, right? Legal and sales have different incentives, and that makes the company stronger, and they're all working towards the same thing. And we'll get into that in the solution.
But that's an important point because people don't realize they're working towards the same thing.
Yeah, but right now it's like what we want to highlight is, and just like every function at the company, legal and sales have their own sort of stereotype tied to them. And what you need to do on the sales side or the legal side is to consciously work against that stereotype. And so we kind of wanted to just throw out, here's the stereotype, and then we can kind of start to think about, okay, like whether it's fair or not, it's something that you need to work against, because that's, if you're a used car salesman, you got to be extra trustworthy.
Robert, are you calling all salespeople used car salesmen? I just want to see.
Yeah. And if you're a lawyer, you got to be careful about wearing a bow tie too much.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. So, all right. So cultural disconnect is number one. Second, transparency between your go-to-market team and your legal team. What Robert and I have done here is we've detailed out a typical sales process, right? This obviously isn't the same for every organization, but like you see this. There's a couple of very important notes here. So you can see all the square or rectangles there. This is like sales owned, our ovals, that's legal owned, and then kind of like the rounded squares are the rounded. That's joint sales and legal owned. A couple of call outs. One, there are very few steps in this process where there's joint sales and legal owned. Two, sale or legal is actually coming into the process very late in the sales process, right? So they're coming in stage 4 and haven't had any information beforehand. And they're then trying to get up to speed with information, discovery, all that type of stuff. And then as they're going back with questions and things like that, that's that making it feel like the sales process is getting actually pushed back up the funnel, back into a more stage 2, stage 3, middle of the funnel. Robert, when you've seen this kind of like traditional sales process and this lack of transparency, like what are some of the perspectives you've seen, particularly when it's gone poorly?
Yeah, I mean, I think the quote sort of at the top of the slide kind of says it all, which is that legal is a black hole. And I mean, I literally had that feedback provided to me at a company. As I think about sort of trying to work against the stereotype, it's like, well, I thought I'd been communicating well, but you need to do more than communicate well. You need to kind of go above and beyond to break out of that stereotype. And what I see in this process is sales has no insight into sort of what the legal process is, what the issues are, how to help work through those issues, where does like the rep saying, can I have it tomorrow? Like, that's not a function of the rep being a jerk. It's a function of them not understanding what goes into actually reviewing, redlining, responding to an agreement, or legal's current workload. And so I think that, you know, providing some of that transparency can really help, and vice versa. I think the sales team can really help the legal team to do their jobs so much better by legal, especially now that I'm outside counsel, we don't have the best insight into what's going on with each of these deals. You know, so it's not unusual for me to get a red line and not have any idea, you know, what exact products are being purchased or how much they're being purchased for, even sort of the baseline information. And sales providing that kind of info across to us can just really help. And then they can help us, you know, escalate things internally, and we can just really leverage synergies from both teams.
And so, like, Robert, I love that you're describing this. Like, it's like joint black holes, right? It's mutually kind of like black holes that are trying to progress along at the same time here, right? So lack of transparency, and we're going to get into the solutions here, but we're trying to kind of set up the problem of like why this is going on here. One additional note here, and we're going to kind of talk about this particularly as we get into tactics. An area of complexity, particularly on the legal side, is you as an organization may or may not have an in-house legal or counsel, or you may be dealing with external legal or counsel. And because of that, that creates an extra layer of complexity, particularly as you think about this transparency. So I know Robert's going to provide some additional thoughts on that.
Absolutely.
Cool. Lack of communication. So we see transparency and communication as different, because transparency is like what's going on in the process. You know, communication is like how we're communicating not only internally, but also externally. Robert, again, when this has gone poorly, like what are some of the major kind of pitfalls you've seen from a communication standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, and you know, transparency and communication are sort of definitely related, I think. But I think, you know, lack of communication, I think, again, legal teams have the stereotype that we don't do a good job communicating or helping sales know where things are in our stack or when we're going to be getting back on something. And I know that's hard for us to do because we have so much on our stack, and it's hard to sort of just manage that and have insight into it. But the more that legal can be over communicative and provide better insight into that process, the better it will be for everybody. And then from the sales side too, it's kind of recognize that and ask legal what's going on for them. And then recognize that legal needs insight from you into what's going on in your deal. What are the points that you can leverage? And that kind of, I think I mean, ultimately it's sort of joint empathy, understanding what the other side is working through here, and knowing that you're both on the same team can really help. And then I think that there's sort of a third component of it can really help to set sales up to know about what's in their contracts, what the important things are, to help them understand about how to escalate things internally and who needs to be on calls. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten on calls and either had to drop because I'm a lawyer and their other lawyer wasn't on the call, or gotten on calls and it's a call about data privacy and security, and there's nobody on the call who knows about data privacy or security from our side, or maybe not from their side. And it just turns into, you know, it's like, okay, well, great to see you guys, we're going to drop. And so,
but to your point, Robert, right? As we think about this core problem, deals slipping and getting prolonged. I'm a 27-year-old AE, and we use that stereotype, right? But a lot of AEs are kind of earlier in their careers, and they don't have that legal expertise. But to your point, we're going to get into these tactics. If they understand who are the right stakeholders to bring on, how do I make sure that the other side, the prospect we're negotiating with, has the same stakeholders? So it's not like we jump on here and like, oh, we can't have this meeting. We need to reschedule for 3 or 4 days out. The number of times I'm sat in a pipeline update is like, oh, we had to reschedule this meeting because so-and-so wasn't available, or we didn't like, it's having that communication.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. So we've talked about cultural disconnect, transparency, and communication. The last one here is process. So when we talk about process here, this is in terms of kind of like how everything is kind of like flowing along that sales and legal communication process. And again, some of this understanding, if I have to escalate something, who do I escalate to? How do I escalate? All those things. Robert, like when this is not working well, like what are your perspective of like when process is not going well?
Yeah, I mean, I think things just get really clunky internally, right? So, I mean, and there's just a whole lot more back and forth than there needs to be, and confused emails and meetings that don't really get much done. You know, so I mean, I think it starts off with, you know, an agreement gets passed over to legal that doesn't have the details that legal really needs to actually review and respond to the agreement. And then legal raises a bunch of issues, but there's no sort of clear process for how to escalate those issues, or who determines and decides them. You know, is it legal that decides it? Probably not. Is it the sales rep that decides it? Probably not. You know, but those need to go up to the correct people on the executive team, and different folks need to sort of have insight into how to work through that. And with a poor process, that just is incredibly clunky. Your legal doesn't have insight into who to reach out to. They reach back to the rep. The rep sort of tries to chase down people internally, and it's chaos.
And to further kind of double click on this point, right? You think about this of like all of a sudden we have a mid-market team that's got 10 individuals, an enterprise team that has 5 individuals. There's no kind of deal desk owner. So you now have 15 individuals reaching out to legal independently. There's different variants understanding of like what to do, who to ask. Like, so all of a sudden there's this compounding thing. And then you layer on top of that into quarter close pressure. And all of a sudden you can see how we end up with these elongated slip deals.
Yeah. And I think that then the other thing that I would add too is it's just lack of process means there's nothing to sort of iterate on and improve. And so there's no learning, right? I mean, it's fine if I don't know who the chief information and security officer is. And so like I have to go figure that out and then send something to him for approval, or her for approval. And then, but when I do that, I shouldn't have to figure that out next quarter, or somebody on my team shouldn't have to figure that out next quarter. We need to leverage the learnings. Okay, we agreed to, you know, a $5 million limit of liability with this large enterprise customer because we really wanted them to get across the line. And the CEO, you know, that went up to the CEO and he ultimately approved it. But he was considering XYZ factors. How do we build that learning back into our process so that next time we can make that happen smoother and faster?
Love this. So we've teed up the issue. Deals are slipping, and it's due to cultural disconnect, transparency, communication, and process. Let's jump now into like what we can actually do across each one of these and stuff you can take away today to actually like try and figure this out. So culture disconnect. Yeah. Robert, I'm the 27-year-old AE. I'm like, WTF, you have a big red pen. You're not moving fast enough. So I've sent you 37 emails. What's going on here? Like, talk to us a little bit about commonalities. Like, how do we kind of bridge that gap of like helping the 27-year-old understand what you're doing and vice versa of like why this is important for the 27-year-old?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's it's that understanding. I mean, we sort of have that in the third bullet, but right, it's understanding and empathizing with the pressures that the other team is under and what they're dealing with. I mean, so for legal, you know, I mean, what we have to know is that making their target number is a huge deal to salespeople, and it impacts their livelihood, and that's something that we should take seriously. And we should also know that they're not there to just sort of at the same time get deals done for any reason that don't matter to the company. I mean, I think if you can clearly tell, I mean, I don't think I've ever dealt with a sales rep who, you know, really, if you can explain, hey, look, this is why this is a bad deal from a legal perspective, and here's why we need to deal with it. They're really open to that, especially if you can come back with, and here's how we can move through it. Right. I mean, I think one of the things as we think about communication that legal really needs to work on is not just being responsive, but also not just being a no factory. Right. Like it's easy to think of all the reasons to say no, but where you really start to add value to a company is to say, look, here's the issue with the approach that is being proposed, and we can't do that, and here's why. But here's a creative solution that I think could work. And sometimes when you start to build this connection instead of this disconnect with sales, sometimes those solutions that you can come up with are synergistic between the two teams, right? It's we can't, they really want to be able to use our name and logo. And like our company doesn't do that. I'd have to escalate it to the head of marketing, and they're going to deny that request. Maybe we can do that, and the head of marketing would be more amenable to that if there was a steeper discount that got included for sales. And so like that's the kind of thing where you can leverage both teams, and I think that kind of synergy is where you really start to be moving.
And from the sales perspective, right? Because in RevOps, we've sat a lot on kind of like on the sales side and being a part of these conversations. When legal and the legal organization is coming across as like, hey, look, we're trying to protect the company, but we're also trying to help you get this deal across. So they're coming up with those creative solutions that you're mentioning, Robert. The sales team's like, they're all in. They don't see this as this kind of like, hitting heads like, oh, okay, yeah, I totally understand what Robert's doing. He's trying to protect the company, but he's helping me also try and get this deal across. Like, and the salespeople see this as an accelerant, not this kind of like, barrier to like getting deals done. I think when it's not gone well, the perception is sales sees finance, legal, some of those key functions as barriers to their livelihood getting deals done, as versus like, oh yeah, Robert's totally on my team. That guy's great. Like all those types of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the power of shifting no into how is just incredible. I mean, like it changes it from this, like, as you said, it's really like this, butting of heads to like a brainstorming session. It's not like even your how needs to be the 100% right way. It's just, look, here's a potential solution to this, guys. Like, what do you think? And then sales can come back and say, oh, I don't know if that works, but like, thanks for explaining the issue. What if we did this? And that can be really helpful too.
Yeah, 100%. And sales then has the different kind of like perspective of like, oh yeah, Robert's just there just trying to protect the company, but he's also helping me out. So let's take this a step further, Robert. So as we think about this cultural disconnect, we've talked about not only trying to find common ground, but like there's also this ability to kind of like understand like what are the different areas of expertise. And that understanding kind of helps create some of those commonalities. So like walk us through this, like, how do we kind of like bridge this, like, all right, Robert, I know you're a lawyer, but like, what does that mean? Why are you here? What's the goal here, for the organization?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's moving beyond even commonalities into kind of synergies, right? Like we have these two functions that have a check and balance on each other, and that bring discrete skills so that the whole is more than the sum of the parts. And I think that's what we really want to try and leverage, right? And so, I mean, I think that from the legal perspective, it's, we just talked about kind of creative problem solving, right? I can see the issues in an agreement, and I can communicate those to internal stakeholders and suggest potential solutions. And so being able to work through that, I mean, it's a discrete skill set. And then, it's the same thing with regulatory compliance and all of that. I mean, I think that legal brings that, highly detail oriented understanding of legal agreements and how the law works that most sales teams don't have. But we also have a lot of gaps. And I mean, Rhys, I mean, you can highlight the strengths of the sales team.
Yeah, like, I think it's pretty kind of like straightforward, right? Like, we're hiring salespeople. Oftentimes a lot of these salespeople will be younger in their careers, but their expertise is all in around like, how do I go out and find potential individuals who like are interested in buying this? Like, I'm helping trying to add kind of like ARR revenue to the company's bottom line. They understand the market. They understand how to position themselves in the market. They like are very talented and kind of like negotiating skills, so on and so forth. So like having that perspective, like, yes, the salesperson is trying to kind of like close and win a lot of deals, and a lot of salespeople tend to be type A, like very commission driven. But at the end of the day, what they're doing is they're providing revenue that's helping the organization or the company be successful. One other important point here, like both on commonalities and areas of expertise, these are conversations, and we'll get into this a little bit later, we should be having with the organization, not at the end of quarter. These are conversations that need to be this kind of ongoing, legal should be in your QBRs. We're going to talk about kind of like sort of like frequency of kickoff, but establishing that kind of like alignment between the two so that you see the kind of like those commonalities in different areas of expertise. And it's not just at the end of quarter, Robert's trying to kind of come in and say, hey, the reason why I like this is because I have this deep areas of expertise and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I'd also say, the sales team, if the sales team isn't all just junior reps too, right? I mean, there's different folks on different sales teams. I mean, I've dealt with, really incredibly senior. I was at a company where we had account executives that were making $1 million a year, and they were incredibly senior reps, been doing this for a long time. There's also senior sales leadership, and legal interfaces with senior sales leadership quite a bit. Those folks have their own discrete skill sets, right? I mean, they understand how markets are working and the key underpinnings of these deals much better than I do. And so, getting that understanding from them is always incredibly helpful, because that really is the foundation of what all these legal terms are built on.
Yeah, I think your point's spot on, Robert. Like being able to kind of like understand these different areas of expertise based upon kind of like where those individuals are kind of in their careers and all that, whether they're more junior or more senior on both the legal and the sales side of the house. All right, cool. So moving into transparency, we're going to talk a little bit about alignment here. We've broken down alignment into kind of a couple of key things, and then there's some very specific things here we're going to like dive into examples. So clarity of sales, the kind of legal review process, and then we're going to get into some stuff around not only your MSA, but then a playbook. So Robert, you want to walk us through what are some of these like key bullets that people can actually take out of this here today in and around kind of transparency and driving more alignment between the two groups?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so like, I think the first one, clarity for sales, it's really all about sort of training the sales team up so that they understand what legal is doing, what the relevant issues are, what they need to know about their agreements. I mean, even simple things like how do their different agreements fit together, right? I mean, you often have like an order form and an MSA and a SOWs, data processing addendums. Like, salespeople don't know what any of that stuff means, and so they're also sending these agreements out and presenting them to clients. They need to understand that. They need to sort of understand how the different pieces fit together, and they need to understand, here's the stuff that we really care about. Here's why these different portions of these agreements matter. And I think that legal can really help sales by communicating that. And I think that that's also an opportunity to sort of bridge that gap a little bit. You can communicate, also, here's what my life looks like. I'm really busy reading all these contracts all the time, and it can be hard to respond. And I want to respond, and I don't, if I'm miss a deadline or something, like, please follow up with me and let's get it going on it.
And one important note here, when we've seen this done well, so for example, when Robert and I worked together in a previous life, he would actually come in during our annual kickoff in each of the QBRs and sit down with the team, and we get a presentation from the legal team, and he would intentionally fly at the right altitude, right? Like, Robert's not getting into the nitty gritty details of like, what's, this term and this DPA, like, the high level, like, what is this agreement for? Why is it important? Hey, this is the legal process, and walk us through the team. So like, if you're not doing that, there's an easy button that you can kind of take out of this of like, have the legal team go in and present to the sales organization on a quarterly basis, and any new hire that comes in, it should be part of their onboarding process as well. So walk us through the legal review process, Robert.
Yeah. And that, I mean, that just like automatically builds bridges too, right? I mean, like, you're there, you get FaceTime with people, they get FaceTime with you. They're much more comfortable reaching out. It makes things so much better. Yeah, so I mean, the legal review process that we have here is all about transparency, like transparency into the legal review process. So what I'm thinking here is more, like, not talking about, I get a contract, I redline a contract, I get approvals, I implement those approvals. we negotiate it with the other party. This is more like, how can I provide real-time transparency to sales leadership so that they know where we are in a queue, right? If I have 20 different contracts that I'm reviewing at end of quarter, the next one on my list should be the one that's the highest priority for sales leadership. And similarly, if I'm a sales rep, it's great for me to be able to go and look at some sort of shared dashboard that says, here's where my contract sits with legal. And if I can do that, then I don't have to reach out to legal and say, hey, curious where you are with my contract. What's going on with this? Which, I mean, like, again, that's fine. And I appreciate follow-up. And getting that same message twice a day from 20 sales reps will start to drive you nuts. And so it's like, if you can, but like, if you don't provide a solution to that and they just have no idea where their contract is in the cycle, like that's not fair to them either. So it's pretty simple, I mean, like it can be as simple as like a shared Google Doc. It can be as robust as a fancy contract management system that integrates with your CRM system.
And this is like tailor-made, and we'll get in this here of like RevOps should kind of own this process. And if you're dealing with outsourced legal, this becomes even more important. One of the responsibilities is exactly what Robert said here. It's on the sales leadership and organization where RevOps can help out to help inform and provide that priority. And by the way, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority, right? So you actually have to be kind of like thoughtful about that. Yeah. All right, Robert, I'm moving.
And that's, like having that just sort of, here's everything that's in the queue and everybody can see it. Like that's the first step that just allows you to start having all these conversations. And we'll get into kind of the conversations too. Yeah. So cover letters, sorry. So a cover letter for an MSA is just, it's something that I've done with a few clients, and I think it can just be really helpful, and it can be helpful for sales too. It's something that it can either be the first page of an MSA that gets deleted out when you're negotiating it, but it's like when you're sending a full MSA to be negotiated with a party that is going to negotiate it, sometimes it can be really helpful to just include kind of an overview of like, hey, here's what's in this document. Here's why we have it in this document. I'm a big fan of presenting agreements that are pretty balanced by and large. That I don't know that I would say they're like necessarily customer favorable, but I don't know that they're necessarily vendor favorable either. And so I think that, like, at least in my mind, trying to present here's a fair deal, or at least what we think is a fair deal, and we're open to comments, but here's sort of why we've done this. It can really set the stage for how to work through things, and it allows you also to start the conversation on important issues by providing insight to the other side, because the other team's legal is in the exact same spot, right? They just get a contract from some vendor that they have no idea what this vendor does, and they kind of get a contract and they're like, okay, well, I'm just going to delete this section because it doesn't seem like it makes sense. And a cover sheet sort of allows you to answer those questions right off the bat. One kind of classic example that I have is around data and data privacy. Being able to just say, hey, look, like we are going to be collecting personal information from you. Like we know that there's risk attached with that, but here's the type of personal information that we're going to collect from you. It's really, we're not collecting any sensitive personal information, so we think that the risk is pretty low, and so we've addressed it in that way. And
this is particularly great for what we classify as like fish deals that are kind of like standard, like call it 25 to 75K in ASP. Those tend to be trickier deals, right? Because you don't have this massive ASP that you can put a ton of legal time and resources in. However, they oftentimes get like very red lines. So being able to kind of like get ahead of some of these red lines to more streamline that process. All right, Robert, I'm moving us along here because I know we got a lot left.
Yeah, we do.
This is one of the coolest things I've seen. So like, there's a couple of things in here that I think is some like easy wins here. The playbook for common negotiation points. I've seen you, Robert, roll this out at our previous role. Like, walk us through what is this playbook and how is it used?
Yeah, I mean, so I think playbooks can be really helpful to kind of document your positions on your contracts. And I think that there's, as I think about playbooks, I think they can be different things depending on the audience of that playbook. So some playbooks can be, here's a playbook for sales, right? Like sales, we're okay with you negotiating these provisions. Those need to be different than, so like I've used playbooks internally at KO Law with different associates, right? Where it's, hey, here's the things that this particular client cares about, and here's the people internally there where you need to escalate it. There can also be playbooks for like a deal desk function, or sort of the internal stakeholder that manages the legal function and needs to serve as that hub in the wheel, where it's kind of like, look, you can negotiate within these bounds, and if you are being pushed out of those bounds, here's the person that you need to contact. Maybe it's outside counsel, maybe it's the CFO, maybe it's the head of sales, maybe it's the CEO. But sort of knowing escalation points, knowing fallback positions, knowing like the key reasons that a clause is important and why it's in the agreement. These are all just incredibly helpful things that allow you to disseminate knowledge of a contract out to a broader team, whether that team is sales, deal desk, legal ops, outside counsel, inside counsel, whoever it is. And the content varies a little bit depending on the audience, of course.
And when this is done well, one of the cool parts is you can get 50, 60, 70% of the way through the legal process without even having to bring legal in, because you have kind of an understanding of what we can do, what we can't do, all that type of stuff, whether it's from a deal desk perspective or what reps are allowed to do. So this is like, if you don't have a playbook here today, I would highly recommend going and rolling out a playbook. And as Robert mentioned, it's like, all right, what are the playbooks we need? Is this sales focused playbook? Is this deal desk focus? Is this a external counsel? Like, thinking about this will no doubt help you accelerate some of your deals. All right, so we've talked some about transparency. Let's kind of pivot a little bit into communication, right? So we're going to talk about intake process specifically. So we've got our fancy workflow chart. This is a slightly updated one, and I want to call out a couple of specific nuances here. So one, you're going to notice here that in stages 2, 3, and 4, this is now joint sales and legal owned because of the updated process. 2, legal is getting brought into the process in terms of visibility into the pipeline, so they have context earlier on in the process. So they're getting brought into stages 2 and 3, and we're going to talk about how to go ahead and do that. But it's like, hey, Robert, want to let you know here, we got these 20 deals. Of the 20 deals, here are the big kind of enterprise and mark ones. Oh, by the way, of that subset, here's 2 or 3 that may need custom terms, that may need to have some questions with. When you then get into kind of like the intake process itself here, you can see then the negotiations, because legal has more context, is not pushing the deals back up to stages 2 or 3. You're still just in that bottom of the funnel stage, negotiation process. Robert, like, talk to us, like, when this actually is working well, like, what is a best in class intake process?
Yeah, I mean, so I think of intake process as, like, how does sales communicate something out to legal? And I think that that needs process on both sides, really. I feel like we use the word process, and hopefully I'm not saying anything that's too earth-shattering to anybody. But it sometimes simple stuff is also really what does the job. I think things like the sales team doesn't know who to contact. Set up a email alias for all the legal people, and then sales sends something to that email alias, and legal has a process for who jumps on the grenade and how they communicate that out to the team. And then that person is the directly responsible individual and manages the project from the legal side. Sales too, they need to know, okay, when I am sending something to that legal alias, I don't need to know if I'm sending something to Robert or to Robert's colleague Chris or whoever. But what I do need to know is that I send it to the legal email alias, and I need to include this information when I send it across, right? I mean, like, I need to provide legal an insight into what I'm actually asking for and how they can help me. So that's kind of, what are the drivers of this deal? Like, what am I selling? How much am I selling it for? Are there key timelines that I'm trying to hit? Are there kind of other strategic considerations that, maybe this isn't the biggest dollar value deal, but there's a huge logo attached to it, and I think there's real expansion opportunities. That kind of stuff is all really important. And then I think that, the sort of earlier stage of the process in 2 and 3, I think that's also important. That's really more if sales is putting together an agreement that's becomes a little bit non-standard, bring legal into that process instead of don't bring legal into that process, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've had sales send over kind of an order form or an SOW with the commercial terms that kind of includes like a little block of legal text that they wrote themselves. And it always has to be rewritten. And at best, it has to be rewritten. At worst, it has to be like renegotiated because we can't do it. And so I think that's the kind of thing that you want to be aware of, so you don't step in the mud.
This is the point where, like, if you have a detailed process and a playbook, sales has an understanding stuff, so they're not rewriting their kind of like legalese and throughout it. And they know, oh, in order to empower Robert to move quicker, this is the information he needs, and this is how I communicate with legal.
Yeah.
Send it to this email alias. By the way, the email alias, as we've noted here, for outside counsel, this is almost a must. Like, because, outside counsel, the other issue you're dealing with here is they've got multiple other clients at other organizations. So they're not as aligned or as incentivized to the organization itself as Robert, who may be the full-time in-house. So, all right, we're going to keep moving along here. Communication. So we talked about the intake process. One of the other big things, and we've referenced different meetings and stuff like this, here at Domestique, one of our big beliefs is what we call an operating cadence. An operating cadence is your meeting alignment or your meeting structure. And it's very important in any meeting you have a clear understanding of who are the attendees, what is the frequency, what is the objective of the meeting, and is there any prep required? The reason why we're so, we believe so strongly in this is because time is the most valuable asset. So how do we leverage the time to the best of our abilities across all people? So we've talked about getting sales and legal together in a couple different scenarios. Bring legal in to present during the QBRs and annual kickoffs. In addition to that, we recommend like a once a month meeting between sales and legal. Robert, like, you've sat in a lot of these meetings. What works well, what doesn't work well in these types of meetings?
Yeah, well, I think back to kind of like that dashboard we were talking about earlier. Having that kind of transparency and visibility, that then quickly turns a meeting into, okay, let's walk through the deals that we have. What's in legal's queue? What does sales have incoming in the pipeline that legal needs to be aware of, so that they can, allocate staffing ultimately, right? Like, if I know that sales has 20 deals in the pipeline, and of those deals, leadership is confident in 10 of them, and sure that 15 are going to come in, and like that allows me to start planning. I'm outside counsel, but like I still can't handle that kind of workload, but I have other folks who I'd bring in and make sure they were up to speed so that when those deals come in, I can address it. It's the same thing for an inside counsel. They're or a contracts team, right? They're so they know like what's on deck and what they need to be prepared for is just huge for legal. And then for sales, it also is an opportunity for them to kind of talk through each of those deals with legal, make sure legal knows what the drivers are, where the priorities are. Deal A is great. We're like pretty confident it's going to come in, but gosh, if deal B comes in, you need to drop everything and jump on deal B because it'll be a harder deal, but it's also going to be 10 times the size and it's going to change things for our company. So that's the kind of thing that these conversations can lead to, and it just again increases that alignment between the teams.
Yeah, I was going to double click on this. This is the building bridges that Robert's mentioned earlier. So, all right, last part on communication, and we're going to kind of move quickly through this. But like, there is a difference between internal and external communication. Robert, you want to highlight kind of like a couple of like key points here of like how you think about communicating?
Yeah, and so I'm just going to do this like really, really quick because I know that I want to make sure we have time for questions. But like, internal communication is, I think, it all goes back to that understanding each other. Sales, be sensitive to legal's workload, be respectful in your questions, and do follow up. Like, that's part of your job. Legal, understand that the perception of you within a company is that you're not responsive. So be overly responsive. Be transparent, be clear around your deadlines, stick to your deadlines, right? Like that's the kind of internal stuff that I think really matters. External communication, I think the big thing I want to highlight there for any sales folks on the call is that especially like lawyers are bound by ethical duties, so they can't get on the phone with a client that they know is represented by counsel if the other counsel is not on the phone. And so if you're going to coordinate a legal call, make sure the other side's lawyer is on the phone. Same thing kind of goes. I mean, there's no ethical rules relating to it, but like if you're going to get on and discuss information security issues, make sure the information security people from both teams are on the phone. And I mean, like that, it's not rocket surgery, but I can't tell you how many times I've gotten on calls where it just doesn't work because the right people aren't there.
I'm excited to know about what rocket surgery is. So, all right, we're jumping into process. We're moving quicker because we're going to try and save some time here. So, a couple of notes here. We're going to talk about deal desk systems. One note: deal desk. We see deal desk as a set of responsibilities. Now, sometimes an organization will have a person or a team who's responsible for this that has deal desk in their title, or it can be done by RevOps or other individuals. Oftentimes deal desk in a perfect world, we believe it should sit on a RevOps because they're across the customer journey. However, we've seen organizations where it sits in finance, legal, under sales, all those types of things. But Robert, walk us through, like in a perfect world, when deal desk, the responsibilities are done well, what are some of those responsibilities? And then let's dive a little bit into systems as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think a great deal desk just serves as that hub on the wheel and adds value to every portion of the process, right? So they can help sales with structuring a deal that's going to be more advantageous to closing the deal with the customer. And they can also advocate for sales and for legal and sort of just help escalate issues and serve as sort of the proverbial cat herder. In terms of systems, I think, and I hate to go through deal desk so quickly because I think it can be a huge add-on. I mean, I guess same for systems, really. But for systems, at least in my experience, I have seen like full-on contract management systems get attempted to implement and like not implemented many times. I think large organizations need contract management systems and have them typically and have teams to implement them. Smaller organizations, I think, need to think about how to leverage the things that they have to still stay really organized around their contracts. And that can be, contracts get uploaded to the opportunity in the CRM system before it can be marked closed won. And it has to be signed, and there's an audit process for that on a monthly basis. It can be as simple as a naming convention that you save your contracts into a box file. I mean, like, do what works, but ultimately it's about knowing that your contracts are archived, knowing roughly what important terms are in them, or at least whether they've been negotiated. And I, there's really just not time to kind of get into this, but I think that's kind of the gist of it is implement something to track your contracts.
From a RevOps perspective, particularly if you're not at this stage of a contract management system, put it in your system of record, your CRM, make it part of your stage advancement criteria. It's easy, and it will not only help, it will help future enterprise value if and when you're kind of trying to get there. All right. Process and agreements. There's a couple of, just pick out the kind of like high level points here, Roberts, about some like things that we can do here. And I know we got a couple of cool examples, particularly on the presentation side.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about putting together, I'm a big fan of kind of middle of the road agreements that aren't going to just land on the other side as, oh my gosh, we can never agree to this. I think you should be able to present your agreement and with a straight face talk through why every term is reasonable in your agreement for both sides. I think that allows you to just move through agreements with folks who might not agree to them anyway. I think I did want to touch base sort of briefly on like presenting an agreement to the other side. And I think this is something that I always talk with sales teams about. Legal, you should be able to take advantage of human nature. Like on the one hand, I want a fair contract. On the other hand, I think it can really help sales to just say, here's the order form that has the services that you're buying and the price for those services. And at the bottom of the order form, there's a link to the MSA. And it's a really clean document, but it also incorporates all of the legal terms that I care about. Customers that really care about those terms will download them and negotiate them. That kind of, again, goes to know your audience, right? Like I've worked in companies where I've worked in companies where we're literally selling into the legal department of Fortune 100s. Guess what? The link to the MSA doesn't avoid negotiation of the MSA. You negotiate the MSA every time for that client. And so for them, don't do that. Send the MSA over in Word and say, hey, we're ready for red lines whenever you want to send them back. And so, but for a lot of customers or clients, having that link, I've worked in other organizations selling into IT departments, and I can't tell you how many times someone just signs the order form for a several $100,000 deal and moves on without any negotiation. I mean, that's a really simple way to move forward. If you're selling into like a lower or mid-market too, you can sometimes make that happen all through an electronic process, like with a check the box agreement.
Well, in classic, lawyer fashion, we have more content than we can probably get through. I know we're about a minute to go here. We do have some kind of this is kind of the last slide of any kind of substance of frequently negotiated terms. We oftentimes see limited liabilities, indemnities, data, IP, auto renews, term for convenience, payment terms, name, usage, all that. Robert, any last thing here, and then we want to open it up.
No. I mean, I think we weren't able to get to any of the legal terms specifically. If anybody has questions on legal terms, I'm happy to answer them. Either on the webinar or we'll give you my contact information. Please feel free to reach out. But yeah, I mean, I think that
we'll send out this deck afterwards. Obviously, we've got this kind of hey, the differences to legal terms, whether you're a buyer versus seller. And then we've also got a checklist here at the end. So 4 things we talked about was culture, transparency, communication, process. And here are the things you can go and do specifically today. We're happy to take questions. We're going to stay on a few minutes extra. If you do have questions as well, you can obviously reach out to Robert or myself, and we're happy to kind of jump on a working session chat through this. So with that, what questions do people have? Thoughts, comments?
Just exhausted. Need a drink of water.
I know. We were battling to lunch. Felicia, you came off mute.
Oh, I just was going to say thank you. It was a great presentation.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Any questions or anything like that? Cool. Well, thank you so much.
Not a major question. That was all very interesting, and thank you. Did I correctly hear you say you're going to send a copy of the presentation to all of us?
We will send both a copy of the presentation as well as the webinar. So you get an email from us this afternoon on that. So Gia, and I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. Any questions on your end, just while we're on here?
No, it's rather confusing. That's actually my Chinese name. The English name that you'll see in the registration is Graham Walker.
All right. Well, thanks, Graham.
I didn't have time to mess about with Google.
Okay. Yeah. What any other questions while we're on here? Obviously, we're very grateful for Robert to kind of share his expertise today. And again, people have any questions in around driving alignment, whether it's on the sales RevOps side or the legal side, happy to answer any questions. But we hope that you all, as we head into quarter, whether you're on the calendar year or offset, start to implement some of these and drive some quicker deals. And so thank you so much for joining us today. And
before we drop, can I ask the audience a question?
Yeah, shoot.
I'm just sort of curious. I mean, I know it sounds like a lot of you are in legal ops in some form or fashion. I'm curious about, what are the big issues that you come across? How could this kind of presentation be even more helpful?
Yeah, I'm general counsel for a subcontractor here in Denver. And so I will say we definitely deal with Rhys. You caught me earlier chuckling because we definitely deal with the how quickly can I get this back? How quickly can I get this back? So we've got like 3 plants and on me. And I have one contract manager. She's on here too, Heidi. So no, this was really helpful, but that's probably what we deal with the most. Or the sales team promising something that maybe they shouldn't have promised.
Yeah. And it's so easy for that kind of dynamic to sort of lead to the butting of heads.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's, you know, like, I mean, it's frustrating all the way around, right? Like, I think I really sympathize with you, because I've been in the same spot 100 times.
Yeah.
And I sympathize with the sales reps too, because I think it's hard to get in there.
I couldn't do that job. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And Felicia, I think to Robert's earlier point, like, and I'm not sure what you all are doing or what you aren't doing, but like thinking about some of those like presentations, meetings to come in, starting to kind of like build some of those like bridges. Like, it sounds simple, but I promise you, like we see all the time, like both sides of the equation, when it's working well and when it's not working. Like, it is a game changer when all of a sudden the 27-year-old rep, like, they don't have to understand the law, but all of a sudden, like, oh yeah, I know why Robert's busy, and like, but I can see in the queue where this is at, and I know what he's trying to do, and oh, by the way, like, I know he's doing the best, and he's going to try and help me get this deal across the quarter. Like, it is a game changer in how.
And
like,
I can actually speak to that. We just implemented that, I would say probably the end of 2024, that last quarter. We had a big, our sales reps are essentially our PMs that go out there. And so we implemented that, had a big meeting where we talked about that, and it was extremely helpful, because it definitely helped bridge that gap of knowledge between why do we care about this and why are you interfering with my deal. So
yeah.
Keep having those meetings, like regular touch point, like just don't have the one. And then if it's not in the onboarding process, I would strongly recommend a 30-minute sync with, you know, the new batch of salespeople. Like, oh, hey, there's the February batch. You know, they sit down with you and you can be like, hey, this is who I am. This is what we do. Like, you can walk everybody like, game changers.
awesome. Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks.
Any other?
I thought this was really helpful on a practical level. I'm working as counsel with a company that's developing food safety testing technology. At the moment, the focus is on getting the tech to the point where we can be making sales later this year. But we have teams distributed between Broomfield and Ohio. And I'd say a lot of what you've put forward could very usefully be built into how we operate, because we definitely have divergence, and we have the remote location not quite understanding that actually we're the HQ.
Yeah.
Can I just ask this? How often do you plan to do presentations like this?
Great question, Graham. So we here at Domestique, we do a monthly webinar. It's usually around different topics based upon kind of like what we're hearing and so on and so forth. So like the topics range from like how to set up an outbound motion. We'll bring in a partner to do that, to how do you think about annual capacity planning? And so it's like around the RevOps space. We wanted to partner with KO and Robert because like we were getting a lot of questions around, we're about to come into end of quarter for a lot of people. How are we accelerating deals and so on and so forth? So that's, you know, we do it on a monthly basis. I'll let Alex on the KO side kind of talk about webinars on their side of the house.
Yeah, we're sort of every other month here at KO, but I know we really skimmed through Deal Desk and, you know, Playbook and some of the other sort of legal tactical tips. So I'm sure we could definitely do a follow-up if needed. Graham, we would love to connect.
Yeah.
So
thank you. I love the fact that you've got the intersection of law and business. That I think does it brings it home in a very practical and actionable way.
It's refreshing, isn't it?
And that's sort of what I mean, I kind of like this stuff, geek out on it a little bit. It's you know, it's easy to get into the weeds on the contracts. This stuff that moves deals along, it's not sophisticated, really, right? It's just how can we all communicate better together? And I mean, you know, I'm saying things like have a legal email alias that goes to multiple people, so sales doesn't have to remember who to contact. Like that. That's easy. But it also is the kind of thing that I feel like most people aren't thinking about, and so it's fun to be able to think about how to improve the processes at a legal level.
I agree. I think I'd lob in one other point, which is you definitely covered things like internal processes and communication. It's probably helpful to remind those on the legal side, perhaps the business, that when it comes to negotiating the contracts, there's real value in face-to-face time with the other party. I just recently had something where we were negotiating a supply contract for something that's critical in our process. And it's been going on for some while with desultory back and forth. 3 of us flew to meet the other people. They put on a good team for the whole day. All the points that might have been difficult in negotiating the drafting got resolved because we were together and we could form an instinctive impression of whether they were truly people to work with. Did we need to approach it as, look, in theory, we really should tie this down? Or is this something where we can take a risk because we formed an opinion?
Yeah. I think
you can't do that by emails.
Yeah. And it, in some ways, it's the same sort of thing, making legal and sales work together. It's making your side and the other side work together and recognize that we're both trying to get this, both companies want to do this deal. And we both want to, do it with minimal risk to our company, making as much money as we can. But, at the end of the day, if we stick to those guns too much, then we don't do the deal at all. And I think that when you get into those contentious deals, actually seeing, okay, gosh, there's real people on the other side here that go home to kids and aren't just these demons that are negotiating and asking for an unlimited cap on liability for things that I think are unreasonable.
Absolutely correct. What made the difference for us was having the combination of the business side and me there to do the legal, so that one could always have business context. There could be explanation of why something mattered, and then when it was all done, go out and have dinner together, and develop something that is the beginning of a relationship.
That sounds fantastic.
Well, Felicia, Heidi, Graham, we really appreciate all of you hanging on and having, joining today and chatting through some questions, things like that. If you have any other kind of questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. This will get out. This will be in your inboxes probably end of day tomorrow. And then, always happy to jump on a call, but thank you all very much. Robert, Alex, as always, appreciate the time, and we will chat with everybody here soon. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursdays.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.